Hello, everybody. It's the Matt and Carly podcast back at you for episode 12. We're going to start off with just, a little bit of update, what's going on with us this past couple weeks. We're a little late this week, but with good reason. Matt has been tinkering. If you guys could see the operation that we have going, it does not look like what you see. It's very, there's a lot of cables and lights flashing at me and like background things, but he's been working tirelessly trying to figure out how to get this audio just right and how to make everything perfect. And again, disclaimer, I have no involvement. He is a wizard when it comes to learning things and it sounds wonderful. So he's been tweaking. So he's had a couple things come in the mail, that we've just so happened to leave sit outside for 24 hours or longer.
Yeah, and we burn the boxes as soon as we take it out. Burn the boxes
as soon as you take it out. But yeah, so he's been kind of tweaking the sound and all the things. So we're coming at you a little late, but that's okay. Yeah. I think this podcast, we are going to talk about how we've gotten into hunting and the outdoors. And by we, I mean, probably the majority of our experience combined collectively has been really from your push as a younger person to do it. And I've been lucky enough to kind of be entranced into that world and start off a little bit. I did not hunt before I met Matt at all. My dad did, but it was kind of like the typical hunting story where he'd go once a year, once every couple years with some buddies. But Matt's a full blown, I go out by myself in the woods in the dark and I'm fine. I'll in the mountains.
Yeah. Any tag I can get. Yeah. And I have time to go, I'll go.
He's I would say very serious, primarily bow hunter. So I challenged him to maybe share some of his experiences and talk a little bit about that. 'Cause it's a big part of your life. Yeah. And just kind of share intro into how we got into it. And then also because turkey season is coming up in the next couple weeks. So
we're halfway through the month of April already, which seems crazy.
Yeah. What the heck?
Yeah. Turkey season. What's today? Today was today the 18th?
Yes.
Yeah. Okay. So the first day of turkey season is actually right now. Mm-hmm. So today was the first day. In
Michigan?
In Michigan. Other states opened up early. One of my favorite things to do at night when our kids go to sleep is there's a YouTube channel with a group of guys that, they actually started off, they were interns, and one of the guys was a full-time employee at Midwest Whitetail.
I didn't know that.
Yeah, so Aaron Warburton is the guy's name. He used to, Greg, the other guy from the Hunting Public, they both worked for Bill Winke. So they were doing Midwest Whitetail. So when Carly and I were working at Cabela's, it was Cabela's Midwest Whitetail. So with Bill Winke, it was Whitetail Watch and a bunch of other things too. But we had a relationship with Bill Winke, so I knew who these people were because I was managing social media and I was watching what they were doing and the content coming through. So I was in tune with what they're doing. They ended up breaking off. And now they do this show called The Hunting Public, which is pretty cool because they're a bunch of younger guys. I don't think any of them. One of them's married. I don't know if the other one's married. They're basically young bachelors.
They've got no ties.
Yeah. I don't think any of them have kids or anything, but they travel around the country, primarily hunting on public land. And it's really entertaining. They do a good job. They're good at hunting. Mm-hmm. The reason I say that, they do a deer tour in the fall, which I watched every episode because, live vicariously through those guys. And they're doing a turkey tour again this year. So they've already hunted Alabama, Mississippi. I think they're in Tennessee now, and they go all over the place. I don't know if they come to Michigan or not, but so today is the first day of the turkey season. One of the turkey tags in Michigan, ours that we're going to hunt on, starts May 1st. Mm-hmm. So we were kind of talking about this and we were joking because with this pandemic going on, the latest thing coming out was what were you saying? The meat processing plants, people are either getting sick or they're shutting some things down. So everybody was there's going to be a meat shortage. And it got us talking about how nice it is that we have like a freezer full of venison, or not a freezer full, but we still have a bunch of venison. And this spring we'll have 2 big wild turkeys, hopefully. And yeah, I mean, people do it all the time, but
it hits different when it's like necessary, or potentially there will be a shortage of some kind of meat. Not to say that we couldn't just choose to go vegan and get our protein from like legumes and other things, but I think that it's helpful that we have a way to harvest our own meat if we needed to. But yeah, like even before this happened, when you got both of your deer this year, there was a very like visceral part of my brain that was like, this is really nice to be able to have meat that you watched basically be processed on your own, because you know, the truth of kind of what I've seen or how I feel is when, you know, I don't want to get ethical here, because like veganism and like eating meat and whatever, I'm not even going to get into that, but just being able to understand where your meat came from and not have it be somebody else telling you like, oh no, yeah, we have all these processes in place and like, you know, we're really clean, and like, because you see a lot of really nasty stuff about like meat processing, and it really truly is, you know, it's a very touchy subject. It's a very like inhumane things at time or system at times. There's a lot of like really weird things around it. I mean, it just in general, even if you don't know anything about it, if you're not even ethically involved, it's just like, that's a lot of meat. You have to have a lot of meat to feed that like a lot of people, and like to have to mass produce. I mean, that's just, it's so weird. I mean, so, and we eat meat. I mean, we're, you know, we eat meat from the grocery store. Like we eat meat that Matt gets or that I get. Like, so we're very much so carnivorous.
Omnivorous.
No. Well, yeah, because we eat both.
Yeah.
But, it's
my saying has been for a long time, if there ain't meat in it, I ain't eating it.
Yeah.
So I'm a big fan of it. I love steak. I love brats and burgers and all sorts of stuff like that.
You also
Bacon.
subscribe to the opposite of that, though, where you dislike salad.
That's not true. There's just, if I have an opportunity to eat something that has meat in it, I'll probably just go that way.
You call it bird food or rabbit food when I eat it, and that is unfair and uncalled for.
Do you know how much of it I would have to eat to like be full?
But see, it's not about scary. The quantity. I mean, to be full. Okay.
Yeah.
See, it's more of like the nutritional benefits for me.
No, I have no problem eating salads or like lettuce wraps and stuff like that.
Lettuce wraps.
But I would have to eat 500 of them.
I don't even eat lettuce wraps.
I mean, they're good.
My mom does make a mean Asian lettuce wrap. It was pretty good, yummy.
But like, you know, like we had stir fry. We had shrimp stir fry the other night, and that's like 90% vegetables and like some shrimp in it.
Yeah, that's very true.
So, I mean.
Yeah, no, we're I think, I'm just picking it. I feel like we're like, we definitely eat meat. But it hits a little different when you start hearing, and obviously this whole experience for the last month has just, and a little bit has been very surreal, but now, you know, first it started with like, okay, school's going to stop, and then your social life is going to stop. And then, you know, you have to buy groceries differently, and you have to, you know, really look out for whatever and what, blah, blah, blah. But now it's like, okay, so the groceries now that you were buying are potentially going to be, I've seen in places, and I think you told me maybe when you went last time that they had limits or some kind of like restrictions on how much you could buy, which like honestly good for them. It's probably better, you know, easier for them logistically to plan. It slows down the supply that they have to have, or like the demand for it or whatever. Like, right. It's, you know, essentially doing the same thing. It's kind of flattening the curve of like logistics, like having to really like stop. I just said like 8 million times.
I mean, a lot of people, like with the toilet paper thing, they buy all this stuff in excess, and it's really selfish because they're only looking out for themselves.
Yeah.
It's like the opposite of what community is supposed to do, you know, to keep everybody safe. And so like, we grocery shop in Walmart and Meijer because that's what's here. And Meijer had limitations on how many packs of certain things. So like brats, you could get 2 packs. packaged. See, it's kind of like a game because they said packaged meat, like beef.
Yeah.
It was a limit of four packages. So all of the big packs with like 3 or 5 pounds were gone because people were buying 4 of those. So you'd get like a 1 pound pack is all that was left. And it was like, man, a pound of meat, like when you think about it, just to put it into perspective, I don't know how much like weight wise we got. I shot 2 whitetail bucks last year in the fall, and Carly and I processed the meat ourselves. And it's like our big pull out tray in our big upright freezer was full of venison, and it was all super clean processed. And
we had that plus the shelf above it, I think.
Yeah, we had a bunch. And I mean, like for us, like in the east here, we're in Michigan, it's pretty much whitetail deer. I mean, if you duck hunt or, like something like that, turkey hunting, you can get a turkey, which, I mean, that's a couple of meals, 2 or 3 if you have a family. Yeah. But like you could do waterfowl. You could do pheasants in certain spots, but for the most part, it's whitetail deer. So I shot 2, and that was an experience trying to process 2 full deer at the same time. But like, so for some of my friends out west, if you shoot an elk,
that's a lot.
I mean, that's a whole different ball game. Or like if you shoot a moose, I mean, like people in Alaska live by shooting a moose. Right. I mean, that's their protein, that and fish. So it seems funny that I'm sitting here talking about like, yeah, we need to shoot a couple deer, to get through whatever. But the way that the people that introduced me to hunting, who actually got me into hunting, were older gentlemen that I worked with when I was in college. I didn't start hunting until I was 19, something like that. I was technically an adult.
And for reference, legally you can start hunting
at like 10. It changes. It fluctuates.
The apprentice style thing.
Yeah. So like nowadays you can go out with, like we could take our kids out when they're 10, I think.
Lila's school friend goes and he's 5, 6.
Yeah. So
as long as you're with an adult, but like by yourself,
you're young.
Actually,
I mean, you're under 10 in a lot of states, or 12 range. Yeah. Where you can get your own tag and shoot your own deer or whatever. A lot of people, I mean, I know people that have shot their first deer at 6 or 7 years old. Yeah. And they just do that. But we had, when was it? 2 years ago, we had a poacher shoot a deer on our property, right out back behind our house. And we sort of caught him. Like we caught him in the act. And I ran out to stop him. And I was pissed because at the time I was bow hunting that spot. And the guy ended up shooting a little doe, which is a female deer, basically right underneath my tree stand out behind our house. And it got me really fired up. And it was just because I had these deer patterned and I was putting in a lot of time and I was waiting for a buck to come in, and it just never happened. But this guy shot a deer, and before I could get out there to like stop them, they threw that deer in a sled, pulled it up onto the road, and were gone.
Well, that was not their first time they've done that.
Yeah, and it to me, so the way that it happened, the guy pulled a sled down to the deer, and then he took a different track back to the truck, but both sled marks had blood on them.
Which means he had something before.
Yeah, there was probably another deer in the back of the truck. And so when I called the DNR, I reported the poaching and tried to catch the guy. There were 2 guys. And nothing ever happened of it. But when I was talking to the guy, the DNR officer, I said, like, does this happen often? And he said, yeah, he used to work down south, like where we're originally kind of from. Mm-hmm. And he said, I'd get a call every day from somebody shooting a deer illegally. And so I said, is it usually like somebody that's like shooting a deer for the meat, or is it like a trophy hunter where they see a buck and, take it illegally? And he said down south, like in the Lansing area, Jackson area, it's typically somebody will shoot a buck a really nice buck and sadly like cut the head off the buck.
Yeah.
Cut the head off the buck and just leave the body to waste.
Right.
Which is really sad. Up here, when I asked the guy, I said, what do you think this was? And he said, it sounds like the guy was just trying to get some meat.
Yeah.
So there are people in pockets up in northern Michigan here where they're not overly wealthy. And
I mean, it's a lot. Like, we calculated out like per pound if you were trying to figure out, and I don't remember exactly what it was, but I mean, if you did it legally, if you bought a tag, I mean, it's like, oh, there's a ladybug.
Yeah, I saw that.
It's a pretty decent cost savings to have,
for sure.
if you're open to that. I mean,
$15 a deer tag.
Yeah.
And you can get, I mean, depending on
meat.
how you process it, you could get upwards of 30 pounds of steak off of it, and if you process it yourself, I mean, you can do all sorts of kinds of grinds and, like neck meats and, everything. So the sad part was probably the person that poached the deer out behind our house was shooting it for the meat.
Yeah.
And, so.
Okay. We're going to go.
I'm going to get that.
Get it.
Oh.
No. Let's go have a drink.
Hold on. We're going to do this really quickly.
Got it.
Okay.
I literally have it. What do I do?
Just throw it down.
But what if he kills me?
Just do it.
I don't want to kill him.
Just anywhere.
Bye.
He's going to fly back up.
Oh, he's on me. He's right there. Okay, wait. Just leave him.
No. What? Okay.
Okay. That's enough.
Okay.
He's ramped off. Anyway.
Yeah, he's fine. We get a lot of ladybugs. Where was I? Talking about the poacher. So yeah, the sad part is I think this guy shot the deer for the meat.
Yeah.
And I get it. I mean, I like the taste of venison. One of the things that I learned over the years is that processing your own meat is definitely the way to go because you can control, the way that you do it. Venison and different types of deer. Elk has the same type of stuff.
Cervids, I believe, is the genome.
Well, yeah, it's very prominent in whitetail deer and mule deer. They have what's called a silver skin over top of the major muscle groups. And when I first started out, like I said, I was an adult, but I didn't necessarily have anybody teaching me all these things. Like most people that have a dad or a grandpa that like passes this heritage down, you learn at an early age, like how to gut a deer, how to process the deer, how to grind it up, all the stuff. I had to learn it by myself. And in the beginning, a lot of the times, I mean, I'll be honest, I shot deer and it was so intimidating, the thought of processing it. I would either take it to like someone to do it for me. And at that point you spend $15 for the tag and then, gas and all that stuff. And then you spend another, say $50 getting the meat processed.
Right.
I was never happy with the way that the meat was processed or I took it.
Yeah. Something very interesting also that I think either you told me or somebody else told me is when you take your deer to a meat processor or a taxidermist, or probably not taxidermist, but some type of meat processing place, even if they're independent or like a bigger one, you might not get your deer back.
That has happened.
Is interesting.
Yeah. So sometimes they will weigh out your deer.
Yeah.
And then you will get, say, 60 pounds of venison. But it might not be your actual deer.
That makes me feel weird because
I'm not a fan of that.
The thing that I've learned and the limited knowledge that I have is like when you shoot a deer, there's a proper way to care for it after it has expired. And basically, if it's a hot day or a warm day, which you can have in early October or whatever, if you let it sit out for too long, or if you don't take care of it right away, or if you don't gut it right away, like there's a lot of things that can happen. And if you are a person who takes care of it properly and then you take it to a meat processor and then somebody who maybe didn't take care of it properly, but the meat processor has no idea of like what you did before you brought it to the place. Yeah. Like it can be vastly different. So that's interesting to me.
There's a big difference in tenderness and flavor based on the age and the gender of the deer.
Sure.
So if you shoot a younger deer, it's going to be a tender, for the most part, it's going to be a tender, less developed cut of meat. So if you like, say you go in and say you're meat hunting, your meat hunting is where you actually go out to shoot just an animal for the meat. That's basically what it is. If you're doing that and you take an animal on purpose, say it's, a small doe, say you're deer hunting and you shoot a small doe, you're expecting to have a type of like texture and flavor from that animal. And when you take it to these places, some of them will just give you venison back. It could be an old ruddy buck. It could be, this sounds terrible, but I know that there have been people, I've heard it from where I grew up, that will pick up a freshly road-killed deer. Like
they'll take it to get it processed.
Absolutely.
Interesting.
This happens a lot, so it's not weird. If you witness an animal get hit by a car, it's basically like if the DNR will let you take it. It's the same thing depending on how fast you were going when you hit it in the car, where you hit it, how it, died. Basically it's the same thing, and it's usually a lot less messy than shooting it with a gun or a bow. Like when I was elk hunting with our buddy Brad, we were heading out of town, and literally probably 10 minutes in front of us, if we would have been 10 minutes earlier, it could have been us, a guy in a work truck took out a big 6x6 bull elk. And the thing was so fresh. It was still steaming. The meat and everything was steaming. And that's like basically, if the guy wanted it, you could have hundreds of pounds of elk meat.
Right.
It's like
it's pretty valuable. It's to let that go to waste is just kind of a bummer.
Well, and it happens a lot where, the worst thing is if you are a hunter to make a shot on an animal and not recover the animal.
Right.
And say it dies. Yeah. That's a terrible feeling. I've had that happen before where I've made what I thought was a perfect shot. I remember I shot a buck in the shoulder. Looking back on it, I thought it was just like, like a 10 ring right in the heart with my bow. And an hour after I shot it, I found half of the arrow, and I looked for a full day. Yeah. I looked for hours and hours and hours the next day, never found anything. And, looking back on it now, I realized I probably clipped that front shoulder, and the deer was fine. The deer probably was just fine.
It's easy to do that, yeah.
Because that shoulder blade is, if you hit it, it can screw up your hunt really quick. But yeah, so when you talk about how much meat you get from an animal, like I said, when I was younger, I used to take my meat because I didn't know much better. I think the guy that did it for me would charge me $35, and I could drop off a deer, and he would have it done. He would have steaks prepared, and he'd have basically a big, like, I don't know how many pounds of venison grind, like burger meat. And it was fast. It was like he'd have it done in like 2 hours. Yeah. Which is crazy. Now looking back on that.
Probably because he had some on hand.
No. Oh. No, he was doing it like the guy used to work at our downtown
deli
grocery. Yeah. He was like a meat processor at the store.
Right. So he just did it like on
he was really good at it.
Yeah.
But to tell you the truth, it tasted like shit.
Yeah.
Like the burger was what people call gamey. It was very gamey. I never liked it. I used to eat it because I had felt like morally responsible to eat the meat.
Sure.
But it was just like, oh man, it almost deterred me from hunting because the taste of it was like, this isn't right.
Well, you hear, I feel like and it's funny because I've asked my brother before, or we had this conversation a while ago. I think it was right after you got your deer.
Yeah.
And I was talking to my brother. I was like, oh man, like this venison that Matt got is so good. And I was like, it's really weird because I've heard so many bad things about venison. And my brother goes, that's interesting because I've only heard good things. And I was like, like that's funny how you can have two completely different opinions about something. Right. That because it really is, it's kind of like people either love it or they hate it. I feel like most people aren't like in the middle. Like I know my dad said he doesn't care for it. I really didn't have too strong of an opinion before I met you. And then, we had your mule deer in Sydney, Nebraska. And I was like, this is deer meat. Like, this is what this tastes like. I couldn't tell you what the difference was between like really good steak that you'd buy at a store.
You can't.
So I think, I mean, our kids love it. Like, they request it. They're like, Dad, can we have deer meat? Like,
it's so funny. It's so funny to me because they don't know any different. No. Nobody's ever said like, ew, deer. And the first time I made it for them,
oh my God, they kept asking for more. I was like, you guys, I want some. Like, get out of here.
Well, so the main muscle group that runs down the spine, on both sides of the spine of a deer or an elk or whatever, is called a backstrap. That's just what we call it.
Yeah.
But that's usually one of the most tender parts of an animal that you harvest. So I made them that, and I'm trying to remember what I did. I think all I did was use butter. So venison is very low in natural fat. Like, it's not a marbled meat. So you have to add in some type of fat, to balance it out so it doesn't get overly dry. And I cooked them thin cut slices of backstrap with I think it was a little like a teaspoon of A1 steak sauce, butter, and Montreal steak seasoning and salt and pepper.
That was so good.
Basically just like simmered it in a pan. And our oldest, who's pretty picky with food, ate like 4 servings of it. And she was like, picky. I love this. So it's cool to be able to see that because, like I said, when I started, I would take it to this guy and it was bad. Yeah. I mean, it was like, it tasted foul. And with me not knowing any better and not knowing the difference between the proper way of processing and like the quick, crappy way of processing, if the way that I do it, and you watch me do these this year, I make sure that I remove 99% of what they call the silver skin. It's called sinew, and it's where the gamey flavor lives.
Right.
So if you don't take that off, you're going to get weird tasting, chewy stuff. So that burger, I'm assuming, was just full of it. He was probably cutting off big chunks and grinding it all together and calling it good.
Well, every pound that they can sell too. I mean, if it's, if they're just doing quick cuts and they're not taking their time.
No, that guy did not trim anything the way that I trim it. Some people, I know people that have grown up. When I was an intern at Cabela's, there was a guy who was also an intern from Wyoming. And he's told me he basically grew up on venison. He was like, we ate venison 9 times out of 10. Yeah. And like beef, they just didn't really eat.
Right.
So they would shoot mule deer and whitetail. And that dude knew how to process a deer. Yeah. Like, he was good at cooking. It was like, but he told me, he was like, oh, we don't care. He's like, we're just used to it.
Yeah.
We throw it all in, we eat whatever.
Yeah.
So it's an acquired taste. If you grew up on it, you're probably used to it. For me, not ever having any until I was 19. The first deer I shot was out behind my aunt and uncle's house with a shotgun during shotgun season. And I remember my uncle cooked up some of that venison. It was really good. And then when I went to cook it later, I didn't know what I was doing. And it wasn't very good. But, over time, you learn the way to process it. You learn the things to definitely not do. Unfortunately, when we were out in Nebraska again, I went on a pronghorn hunt, which it's pronghorn antelope. And where you hunt those during bow season, it's like, I think it was 95 degrees the day I shot that pronghorn. And it was later at night. And I was in a rush to quarter. So when you quarter an animal, it's not necessarily like quartering, like a beef, like a cow. That's literally where you like cut the spine in half, and then you've got the two back legs and 2 front legs.
Right.
Quartering is usually you remove both hind legs, the inner tenderloins, the back straps, the front shoulders, and then as much of the neck meat as you can get. And then a lot of people I know will also take the rib cages to have the rib meat. So when I did mine, I ended up cutting, I thought it was smart at the time. What I did was I quartered out the antelope, and instead of taking the skin off the quarters, I left the skin on to protect it. from the dirt and the dust and all that stuff. And, I was like, okay, this is going to be good. Well, when I got back to camp, it started to cool down, but basically I had an hour drive to the closest place to get ice or anything. Mm-hmm. So with the little bit of ice I had, I put basically the full antelope, the full pronghorn in a cooler. And by the time I got to a place where I could get ice the next morning, I threw ice in there and got it cooled down. But by the time I got back to our house, a lot of the ice had melted and the quarters had kind of sunk down into the ice water. Mm-hmm. And I was thinking like, oh, it's fine. It's protected. Well, there are glands, scent glands on basically like the ankles, call it the ankles of the back legs of deer and elk.
Like where an Achilles tendon is basically like right in that area.
And I didn't think twice about that. And basically what that did was the scent gland basically just like diluted into the water and got all over the meat.
It marinated your meat.
And I remember because the first time I ate pronghorn, one of my good friends out at Cabela's cooked us up some pronghorn. And I was like, oh, it was some of the best meat I've ever had. Yeah. Like no joke. And when I went to eat mine, I was like, what's wrong with this meat? It tastes skunky. Like, what is wrong with this meat? And this is going to sound bad, but I ended up just letting it sit in the freezer because it tasted so terrible.
I remember that.
And I didn't know what I did wrong. I was like, what in the world did I do wrong? Well, now I know because I've gotten better and I've learned more that gland got all over the meat.
Right.
So one of the first things I do now is I won't touch the meat until I've taken that gland off and made sure, like, if I'm using gloves or, whatever, that I have gotten rid of the gloves that I had touched the gland with. Yeah. To make sure that I don't cross-contaminate the meat.
Well, and you bought meat bags too, right?
Yeah.
So you can actually store them in the proper...
Yeah, so one of the biggest things out west, when I went elk hunting with our buddy Brad, I never had these before because out in the eastern part of the United States, there are places where people whitetail deer hunt, like where you're not hiking and camping and doing these things like backcountry style stuff. Mm-hmm. You can typically like drive your truck or an ATV up to where you shoot a deer, put it in the back of your truck, and you're on your way.
Right.
When you're out, like out, like talk about a typical elk hunting situation. If you shoot a big elk and you're 5 miles away from your camp, mm-hmm. you're not taking that full elk with you.
You've got to physically pack it out on your body.
An elk quarter, like the hind quarter of a big bull elk could be upwards of 100 pounds. Yeah. It's a
commitment when you go elk hunting.
It's like you're basically carrying like a person on your back.
Right.
So if you're doing it by yourself, you're probably, say you shoot an elk with a big rack and you want to keep the rack, or say you're going to have it shoulder mounted.
So heavy.
You're going to have the skull. You're going to have both sides of the rack, which could be upwards of 30 or 40 pounds.
Not light.
And you're going to have the cape, which mm-hmm. is the skin, like from the mid chest up. So you're going to have that to pack out, which is usually last. You're going to have both back quarters. You're going to have all the secondary cuts of meat. So the back straps, the loins, the rib meat, the neck meat. And then you're going to have the front quarters. So you're talking, depending on how big the animal is, a trip for the hind quarter with maybe another bag, another trip for the other hind quarter, another trip for the front quarters.
It can take 2 days. Yeah, I've heard in some situations you have to go and camp. You have to like a whole day's worth of taking the meat down, and then you actually camp overnight wherever your meat is, so you can protect it, and then keep going.
So what Carly was talking about with these game bags is basically they are dirt proof and insect proof bags that you would actually put a full quarter of meat or all the cuts of meat in and then tie up at the top. And they're super strong. You can hang them up in a tree. If you're in bear country, it gives you something to protect the meat and get it way up where a bear can't get to it. But really what it's for is to keep flies off.
Yeah.
So like if it's a warm area, it is incredible how fast just swarms of flies will find you as soon as you shoot an animal.
It's weird.
So to keep the flies off and to prevent them from laying eggs in the meat, which is really disgusting to think about, you use game bags. So usually what you do when you're going to hike or like hike meat out, pack meat out, the best way to do it, if you have time, if it's not overly hot or if you can manage it, is you do what you call bone out the meat. So like if you have a hind quarter, a lot of the weight of that quarter is actually the bone. It's, so if you can cut the muscle groups off of the quarters and just take out the meat, it's way more efficient and it's cleaner, and you put the stuff directly into a meat bag. And that's the way to go. Right. So the biggest thing is you just don't want to waste when you go to that much effort. Part of me is glad that I didn't grow up elk hunting, because if I would have done these stupid things with elk, I mean, it could have been like hundreds of pounds of wasted meat just from doing little things that I didn't even know I was doing wrong. So when we talk about it this year, like Carly and I were talking about this spring with this like possible meat shortage coming up, it's like, it's going to be nice to get out and take 2 turkeys, and have 2 big turkey breasts and back legs. And
I was thinking about grinding, like if we ground up the meat too, to have like, because you can make tacos with ground turkey. Like it's not that crazy, especially if you put seasoning on it. You can't super tell the difference. Yeah,
I mean, we've got a meat grinder, and just to do burger or whatever is.
I like, honestly, when we have venison or turkey or whatever, I really like the fact that it is low in fat. I mean, it's super lean meat, and it's in theory organic. I mean, you're not like, you can ethically, I don't know if it's cruelty free. I would say it's, the animal isn't suffering endlessly before. They're not trapped in a cage their entire life. Like that part of it to me is I like that, because I know that, that animal lived its entire life just being an animal. And then it was, at some point it was meat. I mean, we took it for meat, and it's like the fact that it's free ranging, quote unquote, which, is on packaging all the time now, which, if people are buying meat or
organic,
whatever,
free range.
I mean, that's literally, if you had to label what we're doing, it's organic, free range meat. It's not, no hormones, no antibiotics, low stress, like, whatever. I mean, and it's, like we're laughing, but that's what people buy sometimes. They're like,
that's what people did from the beginning of time.
Exactly. But it's like, people are like, well, I want meat, but I don't want it to be from like a plant where they process it. So it's like, it's a hot commodity in a lot of places where they're like, hey, like I'm cool with eating meat, but I just don't want it to be in a shitty way. And it's like, to me, that is important, because like when you bring home a deer, I'm like, I know that you know where that deer came from. It's, it was just eating whatever was on the ground that it could eat, as long as it doesn't have like diseases and like whatever. Like,
well, we inspect every. Yeah. I mean, I inspect every cut of meat that comes off of an animal.
That is actually really. I mean, think about that. How many times have you gotten like food poisoning, and you're like, wow, where did I get that?
Well, I know how I washed my knives. I know how I washed the food totes that I use. I know that the cutting boards were sanitized. Like, I know these things.
Right. And not to say that you can't get anything from eating wild meat.
I mean, there's all sorts of weird stuff that you could potentially get, but
at least you have little more knowledge behind how it was processed and how it, how you got it.
I mean, if you can think about this too. So like, if you're hunting wild game, depending on the way that it's taken. So like during the rut, for example, when the deer are breeding or whatever, elk, the bucks. So just to clarify one more thing, the reason people typically shoot a buck, and I don't think most people get this, is when you shoot a buck or a bull of, a species of animal, say you shoot a whitetail buck, the difference in body mass between a mature buck and a mature doe is scary.
Yeah.
Most people don't get it. So when you go out and you hear about people hunting and people go, well, hunting's not that hard. or like they make it a big deal when they shoot a big buck.
Yeah.
Right. There are people that don't give a shit about the meat and they're just out for the fun of it.
Yeah.
But there are people that are super proud that when they shoot a big, mature, and when I say mature, I mean like fully developed, one of the older animals in a herd. When you shoot a mature buck, not only is it, number one, it's a lot harder to do than people think.
Yeah.
Like I could go out and probably shoot a deer, just a deer.
Well, they increase in intelligence as they age.
Oh,
obviously.
yeah.
Like
they
learn
get wise.
where spots are bad. If there's pressure from other hunters, they know not to go there. They become more like. Yeah.
So like if I was going to go out just to purely meat hunt, people probably don't understand this either. When you buy a tag, even if you're just simply meat hunting, people don't get that if you're going to go through the effort of killing an animal, processing the animal, and then going through all the things to get the animal out of where it is and, gut it, you might as well shoot the biggest animal you can get. Because even if it has a rack on its head, you're still going to get 50 pounds more meat off of a buck than you would a doe.
Right.
So it's like when you pack out, so like another way of putting it, when I shot a cow elk, my buddy and I, it took us 2 trips. It was like 1.5 trips. And I had a hind quarter and a front quarter on my back on a pack and went down the hill, no problem. With a bull elk, you will be struggling with just the hind quarter.
Right.
And that's how much bigger it is. So it's like, it's a major difference. So just to clarify, it's like people that shoot bucks or does or whatever, a lot of people go like, well, why wouldn't you just shoot the first deer that walks out? Because they're usually small and young and dumb. So if you're just purely going to invest your time to get meat, you'd still be better off waiting for a mature animal. And they're harder to shoot. They're smarter. So when I was younger, well, how do I want to say this? The number one thing that I did not realize when I got into hunting, and I'll admit I got into hunting because it was fun. It was challenging. It was like, a young adult male. You're like, oh, like hunting's great.
Yep.
I'm way past that. But the number one thing that I messed up with, that I didn't prepare myself for when I got into like taking wild game, was I did not invest my money, my resources into having all of the best food processing equipment up front.
Right.
And for somebody that got into it like as the first person in their family, if you're getting into it and your parents or your grandparents do it, typically they're going to have a lot of the stuff to process. I didn't have that stuff. So when I was young, if I didn't pay to process the deer, like to have somebody do it, there were times when I would donate deer, which I still feel really good about.
Yeah, that's a very cool thing.
I would donate deer to the local program. Yeah. Basically, they would have a food processor process it. You don't get to keep the meat.
Right.
But I would shoot does on this farm that I was hunting just to keep the deer numbers down for the guy. And I wouldn't keep the meat. I would take it and donate it. And, I felt cool. I was like, okay, this is a cool thing to do. It's helping people, it's helping the farmer get some deer off his property, which is cool. And it's fun for me to go out and do what I like to do.
Well, and for people that don't deer hunt, having too many deer on your property, if you have crops or if you have farmland or whatever, they start to destroy.
Super damaging.
Yeah.
And, yes, there are different reasons to do it. There are different ways. And like some states require you to shoot a doe before they will issue you a buck tag. So it's called an earn a buck program. I think Wisconsin did it for a while. I'm not sure which ones have it now, but that's smart too, because it helps eliminate the overpopulation of deer, and it gives the hunter a chance after they do their part to herd manage. Right. Then to go after a buck. Yeah. So there was a story, can't remember the specifics of it, but there was basically like a food shelter or a homeless shelter in the city that I grew up. And I'm trying to remember exactly how this went down, but I had probably a 15 or 20 pound bag of venison burger that was processed actually by a food processing place that was really good. And that year I had shot like 3 or 4 deer, and I donated one. I had a full deer in the freezer, and I had another deer processed. And at that time, my parents were letting me keep the meat in their deep freeze.
Mm-hmm.
And my mom called me on the phone. She goes, "Hey, like, we're out of room. Like, you are full of venison. We don't have room for other food.
Right.
We want to get other things too." And she said, "Do you mind if I take a bag of this stuff down to the shelter and see if we could donate it?" And I said, "No, absolutely. Like, go for it." And I'll always remember this because it was like, oh, wow. Like, we've been fortunate where we don't struggle to eat food.
Right.
Even in like this pandemic, we're not struggling to find food.
Yep.
But one of the things, one of the groups of people that were typically down at this shelter were like single or abused women.
Yeah.
Like women with children that were in bad relationships or whatever.
Right.
They were always open to helping those people.
Yeah.
And my mom walked in and she had this big bag of venison. And she said, "Hey, my son had this processed, and we've just got a ton of it. Can we donate this? Will you use it?"
Yeah.
And the guy that was there working for the shelter said, "We can't accept anything that's not from a processor itself."
Gotcha.
So basically, like, protecting someone from not doing it, in a sanitary way. And he said, "Really sorry, we can't accept it." And my mom told me, she called me right after this happened. She said, "I walked out and I was walking to the car, and this young girl," and I was probably 25.
Yeah.
I was probably 25 at the time that this happened. She said, "This young girl that was way younger than you came and ran me down in the parking lot with her son, like a young baby boy, and said, 'Ma'am, I would take that meat if you would give it to me.'"
Oh, man.
And she was like struggling.
Yeah.
I mean, clearly she was like, "Oh my God, this is a huge bag of like."
Right.
And my mom said, "Absolutely.
Yeah.
Like, take it. It's yours." And she said the girl was just like so like she was so happy to have this big bag of burger.
Right.
And her son was with her. And it was like, man, a lot of people discredit, like in Iowa, it's called the HUSH program. It's called Help Us Stop Hunger. A lot of people take food for granted, like, so when you're talking about this, you're like, it's almost kind of silly because a lot of people that are against hunting, they're not worried about where their food's coming from.
Yeah.
Like, you're not going to hear somebody go, "Oh, that's cruel."
Yeah.
And then they're going to go home and go, "Shit, we don't have food."
Right.
It's typically somebody that's going to go, "That's cruel," but they've got a refrigerator full of groceries and a pantry full of stuff. And when you hear about people like that young girl that basically ran my mom down, like, she said she like legit ran through the parking lot to try to find her.
Man.
It was like, there are people out there, even like right down the street from where I grew up, that are struggling to find food, quality food that is going to feed their family.
Right.
One of the guys that introduced me to hunting, just to be clear, my family is not a group of hunters. Like, I'm the only one in my immediate family that hunts. My aunt and uncle would gun hunt. My cousins would gun hunt a little bit, but I don't think they ever got into bow hunting or like serious hunting like that. But my grandpa, one of my grandpas, was a big outdoorsman. Never met him, but he always had a wall at my grandma's house, a wall of deer racks. And he used to fly fish and upland hunt and all this stuff. And, it's just one of those things where you get into it and you kind of take it for granted where, your food is going to come from, or like the ethical part of it. And it's good to know that there is an option to be able to take care of your family in an organic, truly organic way. Right. So one of these guys that I worked with, he was probably 50. He had a grown son and a grown daughter, and they introduced me, a group of these people introduced me to hunting because I didn't know what I was doing. Yeah. They kind of helped me, understand what you needed to do. Right. One of the guys
There's a lot that goes into it.
Yeah. One of the guys was kind enough to let me come out and deer hunt, turkey hunt on his property and his family's property. I don't think they ever thought I was going to do anything, but I ended up learning a lot.
Yeah.
But one of the guys would tell me, he was like, when he had his son, like 20 years before then, they relied on deer hunting to get them through the year.
Yeah.
So he was like, I can't remember what he said that a tag was, but he goes, we would go out and shoot 2 bucks. He goes, we wouldn't care what it was. First 2 deer with racks, we would shoot them.
Yeah.
And then he goes, we would buy as many doe tags as the state of Michigan would sell us. And we would fill every single tag. So they lived on that because they couldn't afford, based on their wages, they couldn't afford to do it, to have like a normal life. So it was almost like, the people in Alaska where you have to shoot a moose or you're screwed.
Right.
And that was here in Michigan.
Yeah.
So he had a different outlook where they did it out of necessity. Whereas I was getting into it because it was like something challenging.
Sure.
And, I didn't need to do it, but I'm glad I do it.
Yeah.
So yeah, I don't know. It was just interesting to kind of see that because
it's crazy. Like I mean, before I met you, I had not hunted anything more than what I've seen my dad do. And my dad would go on like big game hunts out west with a group of friends that was typically guided. So, it wasn't like a DIY. And I know he's been deer hunting before and whatever. So I've minimal knowledge. I mean, he had a few like animal mounts in our house or whatever from times that he's gone. But I mean, my knowledge was very limited. I didn't really understand it. I didn't know, anything about it. I didn't really care about it one way or the other. I wasn't like super against it, but I wasn't, no understanding of it. But I've, really gained an understanding and appreciation for what it is that you've done and how much you've learned. And I mean, like I have a bow and I have a shotgun to my name. Like I've actually purchased those 2 things and I know how to use them. I would say my confidence level with both is probably 50%. I mean, if I had to pick it up and say, okay, I'm going to go get something with this, like I'd be like, I might, or like 50-50. It might happen, might not. But I really do enjoy it. I enjoy the sport of shooting. Like when we've gone out clay pitch or skeet shooting or whatever, and like trap, it's fun. I mean, it's a cool skill to have. And honestly, like if push comes to shove, and if like you have to, if you have to go out to get meat for some reason, I feel like I'm confident enough that if I had to, like if I had to, absolutely had to, and I had to get meat for our family, like I feel like I have enough confidence. And there's a lot of people out there that do have that, and it's, I have enough confidence in myself that I could if I had to. It might not be pretty. It might not be like the best. I might not be perfect at it, but honestly, it's the thing that is really interesting too, though, is, the ethical part that goes into it. Like if you're going to go out hunting, this is something that I don't do as often as you do because I think I lack that confidence. If you're going to go out hunting and you've been practicing enough with a bow, especially a bow, like a gun's different because you don't have to have as much like muscle strength to do, to gun hunt. But if you're going to go out with a bow, there's a lot of technicalities that go into it. I mean, you have to be a steady shot. You've got to make sure that you understand where you're shooting. I mean, you have to have the muscle strength to actually be able to pull back and hold.
Right.
And you have to make sure that you're not doing it unethically, or that you're aware of what you have to be doing, or you can severely wound an animal, or you can do, there's
screw it up
so
really
much,
quickly.
Yeah. There's so much that goes into it. And I've shot a doe with my bow. I've gone with you before. And like, it was one of the most humbling, eye-opening experiences that I've had, doing something completely out of my realm of confidence, completely out of my normal life. And it was like, wow, like this is really interesting how much goes into it. And it's, again, like, I feel like I'm able to speak to this because before, not that people can't have their own opinions, but before I did it, I wasn't like, I'm so anti this or anti that. But it's like, I think we've talked about this before on a different podcast where it's like, I like to understand both sides before I make a major decision in my life or like what I stand for or like what I believe in. I like to understand both sides and why and fully grasp like, okay, this person believes this person believes this. Like I believe this and here's why.
Right.
And I feel like being able to go out and have those experiences and watch you and kind of almost be like your apprentice. Like, I've gone out and sat in stands with you for a long, it's, the funny thing is you have to have some patience to actually get it. Because some days you go out and you sit for 4, 5, 6 hours and you see
have to
nothing.
sit still.
Nothing.
I mean, you're sitting still and
you can't talk.
silent.
You have to be in your own brain.
Yeah.
Not doing anything and just, it's very peaceful. Like it really is really kind of, it's meditative. I mean, you're meditating, like whether you know it or not, you are meditating when you're sitting out there because all you can do is just be quiet and still. And it's really interesting because I gained such an appreciation for what you do, what a lot of people do. And I was very proud of myself because I was like, man, like I really understand now. Unless you're straight up just buying meat from like a meat processing plant, to actually go out and be able to get something like that, it takes a lot of dedication and effort and energy that a lot of people don't, like it's sad, but a lot of people don't either have time for because it takes so much to get into it or the money to do it or whatever. And it's like, I don't know, I remember, I'll never forget that day that I shot a doe out of a tree stand by myself with my bow, like fully understanding what I was doing, practicing for months before, like getting that like quote unquote buck fever. It wasn't a buck, it was a doe, but it was still like that adrenaline rush you have to fight through to like stay steady. Like, it's nothing that I've ever experienced before. And if you have not gone through that, it's really hard to understand. Yeah. I mean, it's like, and you can hear, and again, it's like some people are in it for the wrong reasons. Some people ruin it for everybody else. People get bad reputations. That general group of people, I think, has like, it's you either love them or you hate them. It's not in the middle. It's like, there's a lot of people that are super mad or super into it. And it's like, it's very black and white, I feel like. But it's super like cool is not a good word, but like it's really
I think it's really rewarding.
It is.
And I'll say this, like what I've learned, and it's funny because it's like if you're a hunter or if you're in the outdoors, there's like these little subgroups of like different styles of hunting and they're almost against each other. Yeah. They talk crap about each other. Right. Like there are like on the gun side, like deer hunting, big game hunting, there's like these groups of like elitist people that think they're going to shoot everything at 1,000 yards. Yeah. And they're like, oh, I'm ultra long range, and they have the best of the best technology and they shoot these giant calibers. And then you got people like the good old boys that have their 30-06 and they got it from their grandpa and they're like, we use a gun during gun season. Mm-hmm. And then you've got people that are, like the weekend warrior type, where they just take any gun that they have out and they're going to go, for 2 days and they're going to deer hunt and they're going to be done. Yeah. But not to say that's wrong because that's the way that, the economy is supported from hunting is all those people, know? But then you've got people that hunt with crossbows and it's funny because in the archery world, crossbows are like, they're kind of looked down upon because with a crossbow, you pull the crossbow back and it is cocked, and it's essentially it turns into a gun, a short range gun. Yeah. I mean, it shoots a bolt, which is a small arrow. Yeah. But a lot of people look down on that because it's like, well, it's like it's cheating. You don't have to pull a bow back to make the shot. But like for me, being a compound bow hunter. Like traditional bow hunters look at me and they're like, oh, the compound bow is cheating too because you don't have to pull the whole weight and hold it. And so there's just all this different methodology of how you do it. But I can tell you the people that dedicate themselves, which is why I relate myself closest to the bow hunter group. And I'm not even going to say the crossbow hunter, but the bow hunter. Mm-hmm. So, traditional and compound. Bow hunting styles is because if you're gonna shoot a deer with a compound bow or a traditional bow, you're not dicking around.
Yeah.
Like people aren't going to go out, buy a bow the night before.
Right.
I mean, I could go out today and go pick up a random bow, shoot it for a day, and probably go out and harvest a deer and feel good about it.
Right.
Not a traditional bow,
right.
but like a compound bow. But you're not going to have people that are as dedicated to the experience of hunting and taking it as serious when you get into people that just own a gun and deer hunt, or they go to deer camp and it's more for like, well, we're just at deer camp and it's fun.
Right.
Not to say there's anything wrong with deer camp.
Yeah.
But I mean, I take it really seriously.
I think crossbows too. I remember when we were at Cabela's, I think while we were there, crossbow hunting became legal, like where you could actually use a crossbow legally to harvest an animal. I think it was either legal or it so you could buy them. But I think what's really cool about that is
started with disabilities.
Yes, I was going to say people with disabilities who can't physically draw a bow back, but want to archery or bow hunt. Like that's really cool.
The archery season typically runs a lot longer than when the gun season, the firearm season is open, which is why I got into it. I started with a shotgun for deer, which was our firearm season. So up where we live now, you could use a rifle. So I won't get into the technicalities, but like a center fire rifle you can use up here. Because the population's low, the risk of shooting somebody's house or a person is very low up here. When you go on down to the southern half of the lower peninsula of Michigan, the only things that are legal are shotguns and muzzleloaders. So I started off with a shotgun, and over time I learned more about my equipment and I upgraded to a muzzleloader, which I could also, so you could use a muzzleloader, which is kind of a variation of a rifle. There's limitations on it, but you could use that muzzleloader and you could shoot it further and more accurately than a shotgun.
Right.
And you could also use it in the late season for the quote unquote muzzleloader season. So when I did that, the next progression obviously was like, well, there's a whole month of October and then half of November where I could be hunting with a bow if I learned how to shoot a bow.
Right.
So I did. I learned how to shoot a bow. And from there, most of the time, I would tag out, which basically means shoot my animal, before the rifle season even opened up.
Yeah.
So I was like tagging out during the bow season and not even needing to shoot a gun to take a deer. So, but it's funny because you're going to have people all over the board, where people are like, well, I only hunt for meat. And then you're going to have people who are like, I'll hunt for meat, but like I'm shooting for a big rack, and there's a guy named Steve Ranella who does a show called Meat Eater, who put it really well. And he said, like, if I shoot a big deer, and they give me the option to either take all the meat or take the rack, I'm for sure going to take all the meat.
Yeah.
But he said, the best part is, if they'll let me take the meat and the rack, I mean, now you're talking. Yeah. That's like the best part. So that's kind of where I stand, is like, it's cool. It's definitely cool to shoot a big buck. I mean, I like bucks and bulls and all kinds of stuff like that. But just knowing when you make a good shot, and like the 2 deer that I shot this last fall, they had zero clue.
Yeah.
The one deer was directly under my tree stand. And when I shot the first buck, the buck that he was with, because there were 2 bucks, had no idea.
Yeah.
It was so confused. It was like, why did my buddy just run off? That's basically what it was. It was like, you hear a thwack sound, and then the deer's just 10 seconds later, it's dead. 5 seconds later, it's dead.
Yeah.
So that deer had no clue.
Right.
And then the second deer I shot, zero clue.
Well, and the reason that that's good or relevant is because you don't want them to suffer. I mean, you want them to expire as soon as possible from when you make the shot to like when it actually dies. So it's...
And when a deer doesn't know, or when any animal doesn't realize what's going on, like there are times when an animal will realize that it's in a bad situation, or it'll get that like sixth sense where it's like, it gets that fight or flight where it's going to run.
Right.
At that point, you're in a world of trouble because your shot placement could be bad.
Yeah.
You could make a shot where, a deer is going to die, but it's going to take 4 or 5 hours.
And you don't want that.
So both of my deer that I shot were dead within, it seemed like 15 seconds, but it was probably more like 3 seconds from when I shot to when it fell and it was dead.
Yeah.
I shot both of the deer right through the rib cage, right through both lungs.
Yeah.
And they were dead within a few seconds, basically. They were dead on their feet when they were running. They just didn't know it. So, but yeah, I'm excited. Turkey season is open. It seems really weird because we're in this quarantine and it's like, I don't even know how long we've been in it, but we're officially into turkey season, which is really weird.
I saw a really funny meme today. I think I read it out loud. It was like, this year is very interesting. Leap year, like 29 days in February, like 500 days in March, and like 5 years in April. And I'm like, oh my gosh, that's very accurate.
Seriously. Yeah.
That's really, really, really weird.
I don't know.
That's the middle of April right now.
Yeah. So my guilty pleasure, and I'll admit this, my guilty pleasure and
Tiger King?
No, no. I was going to say the way that I learned how to hunt, like really the way that I learned, and Carly will laugh. I didn't have like an actual mentor to take me out and teach me these things. So I literally, at the time when I got into it, the only way of experiencing and learning hunting was to buy hunting DVDs.
Mm-hmm.
So
this was before like YouTube.
There was nothing online.
Yeah.
Like I couldn't get online and watch a bunch of stuff.
Right.
Like later, probably a few years after I got into it, the YouTube thing started to pick up a little bit, and I've got videos like from where I look like a little kid, film myself on a crappy camera. But I have an ungodly amount of hunting DVDs that are all 2.5 or 3 hours long. And I've probably watched every single one of them 4 times, 5 times. But I learned, all the timing things and the equipment things. And like, I don't even know how many DVDs I have. I have hundreds, couple hundred. 100?
Probably
I don't know.
2 or 3 medium-sized Home Depot boxes stacked.
Yeah.
Like
when I was in college,
you do have quite a few.
Most people would have hobbies. My hobbies were basically like watching hunting DVDs and going hunting, like shooting my bow. I remember one day I was out behind our college house and I was shooting my bow in the backyard, and I don't know how, back in the day, this is like when LimeWire and like that was the way you listen to music. It wasn't like YouTube.
Right.
And I think I had a Mariah Carey song on our computer.
I remember that.
And I was in the backyard of our college house shooting my bow with my shirt off because it was like in the summer. And Mariah Carey was playing in our house, and my roommates came home and were genuinely like, what is wrong with you? Like, what is wrong with you? You're like a redneck bow hunter listening to Mariah Carey on the Michigan State campus. Like, what is going on?
That's
so,
pretty funny.
It kind of like, there was just something about hunting and fishing too. I mean, I like to fish too. But that lifestyle, I feel like, is just part of certain people. And it is for sure a part of me. Yeah. Like there's no question in my mind that I will hunt until I can no longer physically hunt.
Yeah.
Because it's just, I don't know, to be out in nature. Number one is like when you're out and you don't see a person or you don't hear a car or whatever for a full morning or a full afternoon or whatever, it helps ground you mentally.
It does.
And obviously the success or the feeling of success when you actually harvest an animal that you're after and you know that you made a good shot and you can harvest the meat, and you
have a major, I'm so thankful that I've been able to do that and that you've introduced me to that, because you just gain such a major appreciation that is unexplainable. I mean, you can't explain it to you can try your best, but like until you just do it for, and it's like, if you just go one time, it's like, okay,
right.
You did it. Like you went, like that's cool. And like you get introduced to it, but until you go over and over and over and you fully feel and absorb the failures and successes, and like, it's just a cycle of like, you might not see a thing, or you might have the, most active day ever where you're seeing all kinds of stuff that you were like, I didn't even know that existed. Like I remember the first time we sat in, I think we were sitting in a blind, and it might have been like in the back of like Doug's field. Man, you might remember this. It might have been one of the first times we were filming, like on the little teeny tiny camera that we had, my little Olympus camera.
Yeah.
We were sitting, and I remember like the very first time a deer came up close and walked right in front of the blind, and it like looked in, and I was like, what is happening right now? Like, we're not at a zoo. We're literally sitting out in the open. Like, we have this, and I remember, and it's so funny because like when you go to stores, this is pre-hunting, like me pre-hunting. When you go into a store and you see this like big boxy blind that has all this camera, and you're like, ooh, secret hiding spot.
Yeah.
Like, yeah, right. That's not going to work.
Yeah.
I mean, really, like, and I know it's more complicated than that, but something in your brain is like, how would that ever work?
Right.
How would a deer not know that that's a thing that somebody's sitting in? Like, how dumb do you think animals are?
Yeah.
And then you go and you sit there and something walks in front of you and you're like, wait, it literally doesn't know that there's people in here? Like, how does it not know? And it like freaks you out because you're just like, holy crap. And I remember being like, wow, like, this is really interesting. Like, I had no idea that this deer was going to walk right in front of us. Like, it had no clue. And it even looked, it was like, oh, there's probably like, there's people in there.
Yeah.
And it's just, it's like so cool to be.
Well, a lot of people grow up, or like their experience with wild animals are like city animals. Yeah. Or like animals that are in an urban, suburban area. Yeah. And it's a whole different ballgame when you like
when deer don't know.
When you're in a car or you drive by some deer or whatever, and you see these like city deer that really aren't afraid of you, and like wild turkeys that kind of walk right by you and stuff. It's like different. Your brain is not functioning at the same wavelength as when you are out in a place where there are truly wild deer that are running away from coyotes or bears or bobcats or whatever. They are on the lookout for predators. Right. Like more than they would be like in a city environment or whatever, like within a city limits area. Right. So when you go through the effort, and I remember exactly what you're talking about, when you go through the effort of having a goal of getting within, say, bow range of a white-tailed deer, and you actually get a truly wild white-tailed deer to come within bow range and basically present you with a shot that you're after, it's like, it's an adrenaline rush.
Yeah,
your brain is just in a different place.
It really is.
When you are in that mindset.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah, I tapped into something that I did not know existed in my like human brain. But man, if you're relating it back to like cave people days where like that's like in theory, if part of our DNA is hardwired to have to hunt animals or gathering, whatever, like I didn't know that I could activate that part of my brain, but it was activated. Like I fully understand now. I'm like, wow, okay, something is happening in my brain and in my body that I did not think. I mean, I was like, that exists? Yeah. Like my brain, I'm reacting in a way that I was like, whoa, like it was almost like it was almost similar to, it's probably in the same area, the limbic system, I don't know. The fight or flight, where you're like, your brain is activated where you're either like going to run, but it's like something inside of you is like, okay, like if I needed to harvest this animal right now and I have the tools to do so, I can do that. And I'm sure it's like, I mean, Native Americans or cave people or however far back you're going, like, that's how they had to do it. Like you have to survive, to continue on. Like you had to be able to get close enough. And I mean, people back then were hunting with like spears and like arrowheads and like whatever they could muster up to catch animals like that or hunt them or whatever. It's just like trapping. And
I mean, this is like a totally different conversation to have. But I mean, we're in a pandemic right now. And imagine if like these meat processing facilities actually stopped.
Mm-hmm.
Say, you know, they say they actually just quit.
Mm-hmm.
Think about how quickly, if like the governor came on or the president came on, they were like, hey, meat is done.
Yeah.
Like there will no longer be meat.
And hopefully that's not a thing.
Well, just imagine if that happened.
Yeah.
Imagine how quickly, like in the state of Michigan, the group of hunters, like right now, because we're in, you know, April, imagine how quickly a group of hunters that are skilled at doing what they do could go out and completely wipe out the deer in Michigan.
Yeah.
Like for food, because they know that they need the food.
Right.
Like conservation, people argue and they're like, oh, you know, like the biggest part of conservation is like the argument of having value for wild animals, selling tags,
mm-hmm.
having seasons and limits and quotas. Having those restrictions protects the animals. And
mm-hmm.
people are like, well, how are you protecting animals by shooting animals? It's not the shooting of the animal that's protecting the animal. It's having the structure where they have value.
Mm-hmm.
And people are going to pay, and there are limitations, and it helps the economy. Because think about it now, like we're in a pandemic. If all of a sudden it was just like martial law,
mm-hmm.
free for all, I mean, the entire state of Michigan's deer population would be completely wiped out.
Yeah.
I mean, because people know how to shoot deer.
Yeah.
I mean, you could pick up a gun and not know what you're doing and figure out how to shoot a deer.
Yeah.
You know, and it wouldn't take long for all the people in Michigan alone to go out and get their deer for the year or, you know, whatever. So it's interesting, you know, going through this and processing your own meat, having your own meat, understanding what it takes to do it,
mm-hmm.
and then understanding how conservation comes into play, where it protects it long term. There's just so much to talk about, but I'm excited. I'm looking forward to possibly doing some like turkey burger and some deep fried mustard coated turkey nuggets.
Did we do those one year or were we
did them like 3 years ago. We didn't do it last year.
That's right.
But I'm excited to share that with our kids and see what they think about that this year.
I know.
So I don't know. It's a big part. I'm excited. Like I won't sugarcoat it at all. Like I'm definitely a hunter. Carly hunts. I mean, she's hunted, but it's like, it's part of who I am, you know? So hopefully I can pass it down to my kids, and hopefully maybe like this podcast and some in the future, we can explain some of these things and maybe shed some light on like the realities of what it is,
mm-hmm.
and kind of the stereotypes that are really common and pushed on people. And
we've had a lot of really kind of well-rounded, interesting experiences here where we've done it on a personal level. We've worked with major corporations that have been on the side of like ethics and morals and like activist groups and whatever. I mean, we've seen we have a pretty well-rounded understanding of what goes into it.
Yeah.
I mean, you've worked basically for most of your career within companies for the most part that have dealt with on some level a hunting.
They've always been pro hunting fishing for sure.
Or like whatever. So we have a lot of, I feel like between you and I, and probably like 95% you, we have a lot of like knowledge.
I think, and I've said this before, I think you have a lot more knowledge about the outdoor industry than you realize.
I probably do, just from absorbing it, from hearing you talk about it, or like seeing you go through it, even if I haven't. I mean,
just from your professional career too. Yeah. I think you know a lot more than you realize you do.
Yeah.
Hopefully, I don't know, maybe we can, what would be really cool is somebody finds this podcast and they actually pick up a bow or pick up a gun and go out and try it. That would be awesome.
I still think you should do a TikTok on basic
Start
hunting,
teaching people
basic hunting knowledge. I think that would be cool.
I do have some other videos that I need to do this spring, fall, or summer and fall. Some things that I need to do and recreate, like how to fletch an arrow and that stuff.
Be really cool.
That won't be on this channel, but it'll be
10
on my
years
other
later,
channel.
like all of the equipment updates we've had and like all the stuff. That would be really cool, actually.
Yeah. So anyway, if anybody's out there and, you know, looking forward to it, go out and try it. I mean, the worst thing that's going to happen is you're going to have an enjoyable, relaxing experience in the woods. That's the worst thing.
I would say now more than ever too, there are so many resources to getting started or learning or being able to just watch, like to live vicariously through somebody else who's doing it or getting started or whatever. There's so much out there. I mean, so yeah, there's a lot of really cool things.
Two of the channels that I would highly recommend, if you're looking to get into hunting, not necessarily as much fishing, but if you're looking to learn and follow along on some like more real style hunts, check out these two channels on YouTube. The Hunting Public is one that I highly recommend, like I said, and another one is Hush. I guess they're called Get Hushin'. It's hunt and fish combined. I've been following those two channels for quite a while, and they do pretty good. They do a good job of representing a realistic side of the outdoor community, and they respect the outdoor heritage.
Agreed.
So go check them out and learn something. You might get hooked like I did. So
Agreed.
Anyway, we're gonna let you go. Until the next one, we'll be back. So this was episode 12? 12. All right.
Should we skip 13 and go to 14? Isn't that a thing that they do in hotel rooms? They skip the 13th floor?
No, we'll do it. Oh, no. Either way. But hey, thanks for watching. If you haven't already, hit that subscribe and like button and leave us a comment about your hunting experience too. Let us know if there's anything that you want us to talk about, because I could go on and on and on about all kinds of hunting and fishing and reloading and archery stuff. And
we know, babe.
Yeah.
We know.
So anyway, thanks for watching. We'll catch you on the next one, right?
Yep.
Okay. See ya. Bye.